I'm Kent Tritle. I'm the music director here in this incredible place. And I'm with David Briggs, our artist in residence. Now, David, you're a fantastic organist. We all know that. You improvise, one of the top in the world. You're a composer and you've written a Stabat Mater, and we're doing the world premiere. Why Stabat Mater?
My goodness. Well, this is a piece, I suppose, that I've had sort of brewing in my subconscious for maybe a decade. It took about 6 months to write, but it's a piece that, well, I'm so excited, you know, that it's going to be here in this fantastic building. Of course, the synopsis is about the reaction of Mary to her son on the cross. And so it's a text that I've loved for many, many years. And it's just been a fantastic experience to kind of depict this in my own compositional language in a way.
The Stabat Mater has such an emotional range in the text. I'm so glad that you've chosen it and that we get to perform it. And as I look at the score, I see that you've really plumbed the extremes of the dynamic spectrum and the orchestration for this. I can't help but feel that there's a tremendous resonance also for the world that we're living in. This text, mothers in Ukraine, lost sons. How do you feel about that, David?
Absolutely, it's very, very relevant, I think, to what's happening in the world today. And I mean, as you say, Ukraine, I mean, I can't imagine the turmoil and the pain that these people are going through, especially in relation to their children. So there is, I think, a definite parallel between the text of the Stabat Mater with what's happening today.
You've written this piece, David, to premiere in this place. How did you go about selecting the orchestration?
Well, I mean, I love this place. And this place has a certain unique resonance. And I've written this piece with that very much in mind. Quite often, for instance, there'll be these very, very soft string chords with very wide parameters, from violins quite high to double basses, sometimes divided into two. And the kind of spatial distance, in a way, kind of is representative of the architecture here. The other thing about St. John the Divine, in terms of the acoustic, is this incredible resonance. So if you play a big chord and then you release it, and it continues to reverberate around the building for 10 seconds. So there are 2 or 3 moments in this piece where there are these big crescendos up to the sort of full power of the orchestra and the choir and the orchestra, up to the full power of the choir and the organ and the orchestra. And then suddenly the sound stops and reverberates, and is then rescued by a very soft chord, maybe from the strings. So I mean, I suppose really I had the acoustic for the cathedral very much in mind when I wrote the piece.
So the first thing I notice in the score is the beautiful writing for the strings, but there are these incredibly expressive wind solos.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Gosh. Well, I suppose, you know, the sound of the organ is basically a fairly square sound, although, I mean, it can be expressive in a different way. But just the opportunity to have a flute, an oboe and a bassoon, which can sort of warm the middle of a note and then come away and make things really very expressive. I love that combination of the organ and just 3 wind instruments, which I think sort of opens the floodgates in a way, in an expressive fashion.
Bach makes an appearance in this piece from the beginning to the very end. David, how, why, and what?
So, I mean, the Stabat Mater has, I think, 12 movements, and they're all sort of disparate and fairly short. So when I started off on this journey, I thought, well, how am I going to make this all tie together? And actually, the route that I found was to use a Bach theme from the B minor Mass, I think it's the second Kyrie.
That's right.
The theme is so you get starting with the tonic, then you get 1/2 step above and then 1/2 step under. And I just thought, well, that shape in a way could be interpreted rather like Christ on the cross, with one hand above his heart, and the other slightly underneath. So I use that as a kind of leitmotif in a way, to use the Wagnerian term. But, so you can hear that at the very beginning of the piece in a fugue when the chorus enters. But it's also kind of transformed and put into all sorts of different guides, different pitches, different speeds, and so on. So that is one, I suppose you could say, a unifying factor.
And it's a real homage to Bach, actually.
I hope so.
As well.
I mean, can you imagine life without Bach?
I can't.
I mean, it's just, I think his music has permeated all of us, you know, right through every period of music, including jazz. You know, every musician who is aware orally is, of course, I mean, Bach is like the Bible, isn't it? So I often wonder too if he realized what an enormous effect he was going to have on humanity when he was composing this stuff. Probably not.
Probably not. He was doing his job. He was fulfilling his calling. You know, I had a teacher at Juilliard. This was a theory teacher in the music of Bach class. Spoke of what we talk about, that theme, da dee dee da dum, and he would demonstrate how it actually makes the form of a cross on the page. Dum, up, down, here. So you get this crossing over. He called that chiastic form. So I went to my organ teacher to ask about chiastic, and he said, that's not a word. But nonetheless, it's really evocative, and it really, the tension and the angst that creates, at the same time grounds everything that happens.
I mean, I suppose as a composer, my principal duty is to comment and to amplify the emotion of the text. That's the main job of any composer, I suppose, of a piece like this. And so I looked at all sorts of ways of trying to do that. And it's strange though, when I compose, I can spend 4 hours on a score, you know, on my laptop, merrily working away, and it feels, I come to an end and it feels like 5 minutes. It's the most bizarre sensation. It's almost, I have no idea where this stuff is coming from. And sometimes I feel like a kind of vessel through which the notes pass, and somehow or other it ends up on the page.
The Stabat Mater starts with a string pad and with the amazing octave figure, dee, bom, dee, bom, dee, and the boom, 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 boom of the timpani, almost like a heartbeat. And the descending figure is just so dramatic, so descriptive of grief, actually. The way that this layers on is really amazing, and it is time-stopping. It's such an amazing piece. We have 2 soloists. We have Andrew Fuchs and Hallie Gilbert. Now, the solo roles in this piece are exquisite, and they're placed just so in the architecture of the piece as well. Now, how did this come to be in your grand concept?
Gosh. Well, I guess, I mean, both of these soloists are wonderful singers.
Yes.
And based here at the Cathedral. In terms of Hallie's role, I know that she has this exceptional high sound. You know, she can go as high as a lark almost, with this amazing resonance and also this fantastic facility to sing in really straight tone and then to turn up a little bit of vibrato when necessary. And I just love singers who are able to do that.
Oh, I do too.
So her voice was in my imagination very much when I wrote this piece. And of course, her solo roles are directly portrayals of the Mother of Christ. And giving this very sort of feminine sound, very, very high. And the tenor.
Andrew, we introduced later in the process.
Yep, absolutely. And also, it's a very emotional part and depicting, I suppose, the very physical nature of Christ and the way he's being tormented for no reason.
And we go from all of that to this amazing, peaceful conclusion. Can you tell us about, you know, going from B flat minor, aren't we, to D major?
Yeah.
It's such amazing transformation at the end. Can you kind of describe for our listeners, our viewers, what that is about as we get to the choral hymn at the end and where this goes to?
Well, throughout the piece for the first, let's say 35 minutes, so for the first 90% of the piece, there is a lot of tension, a lot of emotion, a lot of pathos. And then the final verse of the Stabat Mater in the text, it's all about paradise when there is no time and no pain.
That's right.
And no darkness. And so I just suddenly had this idea, actually one morning in the shower, to finish the piece. I'd sort of set it up with a very chromatic beginning to the last movement, and then suddenly it dissolves. A bit like, I suppose, when you're on an airliner and you're climbing through the clouds up to your cruise altitude, and then that marvelous moment, which still thrills me each time. You break out into the open sky, and suddenly you can see about 1 million times further than you could 5 seconds before. So I suppose that's what I've done with the music, and as you say, it's D major, it's very diatonic, again with very, very wide spacing. I think the strings are divided into 10 parts or something like that.
That's right.
So it's a very rich spectrum of sound. And it's not a million miles actually away from the Vaughan Williams Fifth Symphony, which is a piece that I got to know very well last year when I made a transcription for the organ. And just this idea of ending very, very peacefully and with a very kind of, it's a portrayal of what we hope paradise might be like.
You grew up playing the viola and clearly some keyboard. I don't know, how old were you when you came to the organ?
Oh, 6.
Oh, of course.
And I still remember that feeling of intense frustration when I couldn't reach the pedals. When I was 7 or 8 years old, because I so wanted to play on the pedal trombone, but my feet weren't long enough. And then initially, like every organist, I learned the piano, so that I could get my fingers going. But really, I always wanted to be an organist. But I started to learn the violin when I was about 10. And then I have quite thick pads to my fingers. And so when I was 13, 14, my violin teacher said, well, you should probably move to the viola. It could be. I think she had a shortage of viola players, probably.
Probably, that's right.
But so, for about 10 years, I played in the orchestra in England when I was growing up in the National Youth Orchestra, and fell in love with this great corpus of orchestral music, and absolutely love that. Sadly, my viola playing days are kind of over, although I think if my life depended on it, I could still get away with it.
Oh, I'll bet you could, because we've all had those dreams. You're on stage with a viola in your hand.
Exactly.
When did composition rear its head?
Well, quite late, actually. I mean, I was 28 years old, maybe, when I wrote my first piece. It was in 1990, and I was then organist of Truro Cathedral, down in the very southwest of the UK, and they were enthroning a new bishop, and the dean of the cathedral said, well, would you like to write a setting of the Mass? And I said, I would love to. And then he said, but it has to be very high impact and very short. So I wrote a piece called the Truro Eucharist, which is, I mean, I don't know. It's sung, I think, in about half of the cathedrals in the UK now, possibly because of that remit, it being quite short and quite dynamic.
High impact.
Quite high impact. So that was the first time, and of course that was before computers. So that was with the graphite and the manuscript book. And then I think in 1996, I got my first taste of Sibelius, the computer software. And that really kind of has helped me, I think, because once you've started, it's very addictive to see what you write on the page, looking in an almost printed form from quite an early stage is very nice. So now I compose completely on my laptop. I think the last time I used a pencil was in 2003.
That's amazing. And so, the question, gee, do you compose at the keyboard? You really compose audiating here,
Yeah.
here to here.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean,
On the computer.
on the laptop, there's a sound set. So of course you can hear the choir, and they sound terrible, and they can't do words. The only sound that sounds a little bit more acceptable to me anyway is the harp. So I usually have a lot of the instruments set on the harp sound. So I use that as a spell checker, if I'm writing. But actually the sound just happens in my head, and I just type it in and hope for the best.
David, having composed this Stabat Mater, what is your hope for the impact of this work?
Gosh, what a good question. Well, I suppose with any new piece, the ardent wish of any composer is that the premiere goes very well, and that people will hear it, and that word will get round, and that it'll be performed a second time, or a third, or a fifth, or a 10th.
Yes.
So, but I mean, I hope that this will be recognized as a piece with a rich emotion, and that it will affect people's hearts. Because for me as a composer, I suppose the most important thing is really to try and move people. And also as a performer, that's the time for every concert and every piece that I write, is that you want to get inside people's inner spirits and inside their blood vessels in a way. So that's what I'm hoping, that people will be able to take something very memorable away with them.
David, we're old friends. We've done so much together. I've gotten to do your Mahler 2, your Mahler 8. We've done, oh my gosh, the Beethoven 9, so many things here. And we've done the pandemic together too. Coming out of that pandemic, where we've been just like blood brothers, to this moment where we have now the world premiere, it gives me chills to say this, the world premiere of the Stabat Mater at long last. I am so excited about this. How are you?
It's a curious feeling when you hear a piece that you've written for the first time, because you put everything into it, and more in a way. I think wasn't it Ravel who said composition is 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. But I mean, nevertheless, when you're creating, it's a full-on experience. And then I suppose, I've never actually given birth, but I imagine that for those who have, it must be a little bit like this, although perhaps not quite that degree of physical pain. But I mean, it's a wonderful mixture of raw excitement and also apprehension. I mean, how can it not be? Because it's something that you've created and you really want it to be, performed to its absolute highest possibility, and for it to affect people. So, I mean, I'm very, very excited about the 8th of March. I've been dreaming about it for months and months and months, and all the dreams have been very positive.
We are so looking forward to this world premiere of a really important work by a very important and much beloved composer, David. Thank you for writing for us.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.